let's get started with today's presentation. So pricing consulting for profitability, what to charge and how to get it. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So for those of you who are listening in on the podcast, this is a visual presentation. So please look in the show notes and check out the replay, the video replay. You'll find it in our Consulting Growth Hub community. You'll find all the details. So this is better experienced visually, because I will be sharing some images and some frameworks and graphs and so on as we go along. But if you're, just want to listen in a relaxed way, it's okay. You can still listen via audio. So on the screen, I have a gentleman here. Does anyone know who this is? A very famous expert in corporate finance. So his name is Ashwath Damodaran, and I was listening to a podcast recently where he was talking about valuation. He's one of the world's foremost experts in company valuation, corporate finance, and he's written many books on the subject. And a couple of podcasters asked him, what valuation is, right? Just define, not just define, but just talk about valuation in at a high level way, because it seems like a very complicated topic, right? How do you value a stock? How do you value a company, and so on? And his response was so interesting. I'm sure people who follow him would know this response, but I heard it for the first time. And this is what he said. He said, valuation is easy, life is hard. Valuation is easy, life is hard. And he went on to say that there are only a couple of ways to value a company. I'm not going to go to the details, but there are a couple of simple ways to value a company. But the problem is that when you value a company, you want to understand and forecast its future, because how are you going to value a company when you don't know what its potential is in the future? And that's where the complication arises. It's hard to predict the future, right? That's life, right? Things happen. There's markets go up and down. There's geopolitical crises. There's pandemics, etc. You can't predict those things, right? So that makes life hard. But the concept of valuation is simple enough, right? So I'm just kind of stealing this quote. And I'm going to say this about pricing, right? I'm going to say pricing is easy and life is hard, right? It's kind of like the same thing. And life, when I say life here in this context, it's about life as a consulting business owner, because to get pricing right, I believe that a lot of things have to come into play, right? It has to be like a perfect storm, because pricing is one of those things that, you can't go ahead and change overnight very often. There are some cases where you can change pricing overnight. I'm going to get into that, but in general, pricing is something that only you can only get it right, and you can maximize profitability using pricing when a multitude of factors come into play in your business. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, right? And for those multitude of factors to come into play and for a perfect storm to happen, that can be, complex. It's not impossible, but if you think about it in a step-by-step way, and think about building your business with those principles in mind, then pricing becomes easy, okay? So I want to lay that out there. Now let's get into some premises of pricing. This is what I believe. This is what I've come to see and observe, not only in my business, but in several of my clients' businesses. Premise number one about pricing is that anywhere from acquiring a customer, acquiring a new customer costs you 5 to 25 times more than retaining an existing one. Okay, there are many studies to suggest this. And in one study by Bain and Company in collaboration with the Harvard Business School, I believe, said that increasing customer retention rates by 5%, like increasing customer retention rates just by 5%, increases profitability by 25 from 25 to 95%. That's a huge jump. So the bottom line is keeping the right customers is the key to high profitability, right? That's the premise one, premise number one. Keep these in mind as we move forward, because these premises will come into play when I talk about the factors that allow you to increase your fees for profitability. Premise number two, you see on the screen a $20 simple watch on the left, and on the right-hand side, a similar looking watch. Yes, I know the intricacies of watches, how they work inside are all, vary and stuff. Watch connoisseurs would understand, but just by putting a name like Patek Philippe, for example, on the watch, could increase its value by $20,000 or more, right? So premise number two is pricing is subjective and emotional. Now, I'm going to be talking about some technical pricing models as well. I'm not going to dive into too much theory, but I will kind of touch on them. But from what I know about pricing, it's a highly emotional and subjective topic. So keep that in mind as you move forward. Finally, premise number three is that pricing follows strategy. Pricing is not something that is a tactical tool that you can pull out whenever you want and fix things. Although in some cases that is true, not all cases, but largely pricing is a strategic concept. It's a strategic tool, and it is a tool that is to be used in conjunction with business strategy or marketing strategy, which we'll again dive into as we get into the meat of this session. Right. So those are the three premises of consulting. Number one is customer retention. Customer retention increases profitability. Number two is pricing is emotional. And finally, pricing follows strategy. Okay. Type in the chat. Let me know if there are any questions along the way. And if you've just joined us, also let me know in the chat where you're from and what type of consulting you do, because it'll be easy for me to pick up your type of consulting when I use examples. Okay, I see Wendy is here. Wendy, welcome, and thank you for your comment in the chat. Very briefly about me, I know that there are a few people on the chat in the session live that haven't been here before, and of course some of you listening to the podcast on the podcast as well. So my name is Fahim Musa. I'm a former management consultant. I founded a company called Springboarders, a strategic planning consulting firm here in Toronto in 2009, in the middle of the Great Recession, right? Remember that? And since then, I've sold over 200 consulting engagements. I've, done consulting engagements in strategic planning and business planning for multitude of organizations across various sectors, 30 plus sectors. For-profits, non-profits, large companies, small companies, governments, et cetera, et cetera. And for the past 4 years, I have been working personally. I have worked personally with over 50 independent consultants and boutique firms to grow their sales pipeline and add new clients. In our world, in the consulting world, the consultants are great at what they do. They're technically very sound, but they lack the expertise in sales and marketing, which I lacked when I started my business. So I empathize with where consultants are, especially when they are in the early stages of their business. They get their hands dirty with client engagements, and they don't necessarily focus on building a sales pipeline that will feed their business throughout the year. And that's the problem that I solve. That's what I do with boutique firm owners and independent consultants. So I also want to say that, there are many things that I don't know about pricing, right? I've been in business for some time now, but I'm not one of those, pricing experts. Everything that I'm going to share with you today is based on my learnings and my insights running my own business, right? Being on the field, rolling up my sleeves and kind of, just getting in there and building my business. And also what I'm going to share with you are my observations and insights from what I see other consultants and other boutique firm owners do, and as I help them. So I am in touch with what's going on in the consulting world, and so this presentation is based on practical observations. Of course, there are some concepts, like I mentioned, that I will be touching on, but you won't find a lot of theory in this presentation, because it's not that theory isn't important. Theory is important, but you can find theory anywhere on the internet on pricing. But I wanted to share my experiences and my observations. So that's where I'm taking this session today. Okay. All good. Should we get started? Give me a thumbs up or a chat, a comment, and let's get started. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to share with you 5 ideas to price consulting services for profitability. Now, these are ideas that are not mutually exclusive. They're not like 5 separate ways. They kind of build on each other, and they can be used in tandem with one another, right? So, but I just wanted to break my understanding of pricing down into these 5 ideas, so it's easy for you to kind of hopefully it's easy for you to grasp where I'm coming from with respect to the topic. Okay, so here are 5 ideas to price consulting services with profitability. Let's reveal idea number 1. Now, if you're looking at the screen, I urge you not to laugh. Okay. Idea number 1 is simply raise your fees. This may sound so silly, right? Like, here I am talking about hard consulting topics and pricing strategies and all these technical aspects, and my best idea is, or my best suggestion is, to simply raise your fees. What I've observed is that one of the biggest problems that people have with pricing is up here in their heads. A lot of pricing issues stem from mindset issues, imposter syndrome issues. We kind of talk ourselves down in a lot of occasions, and price ourselves in the low end of the spectrum. And I'll be the first to admit that I've done that on many occasions. I've got scar tissue too, to prove that. And that's how I know that this is a big problem, and it's a human thing, right? It's not something that only you or only me has experienced. It's we all have a fear of being rejected, a fear of losing business, needing the business or whatnot, and kind of pricing ourselves in the low end of the spectrum. So if you feel, if your intuition says that you are pricing, you're undercharging, and you see all these other people around you that are offering perhaps the same kind of service, or perhaps even a lower value than what you offer, and still pricing higher and so on, then you may have this issue, this mindset issue. And so in those situations, it just makes sense to raise your fees. And I've done this in my business. I've raised my fees to over 10 times, right? Doing largely the same thing, offering largely the same solution, right? So I know for a fact that this is true. If you have the right strategy, if you're positioned the right way, if you've got the right specialization, and you have a great reputation for solving hard problems and so on and so forth, and you're still undercharging, then your problem, your pricing problem may simply be solved by raising your fees. It's as simple as that. You see, so consider that. Consider where you are in the business. If you feel that this is something that you're doing and you could simply charge more, and you could potentially see your clients, your new clients, accepting your fees, then go ahead and simply raise your fees. One other thing, I'll just say this to end this. A lot of the times we undercharge because of fear. right? What if the client says, no, I need cash flow right now. I don't have anybody else in the pipeline, right? What happens then? So in those situations, you kind of just, you're under pressure and you say yes. Or you have one or two big clients, large clients that's driving, like, 60 to 80% of your revenue, or thereabouts. And that engagement is coming to an end, and you've been so immersed in that engagement that you haven't had the time, or you haven't prioritized looking for your next client. And so then, you're pounding the pavement and you meet a few people, and you end up undercharging because you want the business. So it's a confidence and fear thing. We've all gone through it, right? One thing to kind of mitigate this risk of undercharging is to ensure that you have a robust, active pipeline. You should have like 3, 4, 5 clients or prospects that you're talking to at any given point in time, so that you are confident of pricing your services and solutions right. If you have options down the road of landing another client, then you won't be as fearful as you would when you don't have any options. Hope that makes sense. So I'm going to move on. By the way, so the fourth idea that I present to you is what I believe to be very important. So I want to spend more time on that. So stick around for that. So we'll move on to the second idea. Select a higher value market. Okay, so a lot of what pricing comes down to is who you serve. Think about that for a second. A lot of the times we struggle with pricing. Consultants and, even other types of professional services providers, we struggle with pricing and we try all these different things, but the problem may not lie with how you approach the concept technically of pricing, but just that you're not selling to the right market, right? You want to ensure that you sell to higher value markets if you feel that you are not getting the right price. Okay, so here are a few characteristics of high value market segments. A lot of these concepts are things that I routinely speak about during these sessions. So if you've heard these concepts before, don't feel that there's a lot of, there's no new value that you are receiving from these sessions. I deliberately repeat these concepts because repetition is good for education, and the repetition is good, right? You need to keep hearing the concepts over and over again, especially if you don't have a background in the subject, if you don't have a background in strategic marketing and sales. So I repeat these concepts a lot, and I think that they're really, really important, because if you apply one of these strategic concepts in your business and you simply get it, and sometimes, it takes 2 or 3 times listening to it for you to just get it, right? So don't feel that this is repetitive and you're not getting value out of it. There's a reason I'm doing this. So let's list down the characteristics of a high value market segment. Number one, the segment faces a very costly problem, right? Like if, let's say, I think, was it Andrew who mentioned the marketing, the go-to-market consulting. So let's say, Andrew has a market of SMEs that he's serving, and there's a pricing issue over there. They don't see the value in it, and so on and so forth. It may, I'm not like, I don't know anything about Andrew's business. I'm just taking it as an example. So if that is the case, then I would first examine what type of markets, or what kinds of markets Andrew is focusing on. I mean, this is the SME market, but the SMEs, small and medium enterprises, is a broad term. Within SMEs, who is the market, right? Like SMEs could be an organization that's 10 employees up to 1,000 employees, probably even more, right? So I want to understand specifically who the market is. Is it vertically focused, like industry focused? Is it horizontally focused across industries? Industry agnostic? in other words. So, and understand exactly whether that segment faces a really costly problem that is bleeding them dry, or, really is a major problem that even threatens the survival of the organization. Those are the kind of, that's how serious the issue should be, right? It's not, you don't want to kind of focus on picking organizations that are failing and that are going to not survive or shut down. But I'm saying that you got to find a costly problem that people really that your buyers really want to solve, right? And that problem should have an urgent buyers should want an urgent resolution. Like a lot of the times, costly problems are organizations have a bad process, right? Companies have bad processes, and those processes are costly problems. And companies know that, buyers know that, but they don't solve it because it's just simply not urgent. There are 100 other things that they want to solve. So you want to ensure that the problem is costly and buyers want to urgently resolve it. Maybe there's a competitive threat, right? There's a new competitor on the block. Again, this is an example, and companies have to do something now. Otherwise, there's going to be a huge, it's going to kind of explode in their face, if you will. Another characteristic of a high value market segment is that you want to pick a segment that where clients are easily identifiable and accessible, right? I say this often, like if you kind of looking for clients in northern Siberia or Antarctica, that's going to be hard, right? Like you want to ensure that you can identify the clients and you have access to the clients in some way, shape, or form. A segment that is underserved. Now, this is a bigger topic. I'm not going to get into the mechanics of how you find an underserved market. There's a lot of videos and sessions that I've done in the past in this series. So you can go in and I'll show you how to access the replays a little later. But if you want to, pick a high value market, you want to ensure that the market is underserved, that it's not teeming with lots of competition. And finally, the market has growth potential, right? Finding markets that are growing and segments that are growing will help you cover a lot of your mistakes as you build the business. And when you build a business, you invariably make some mistakes. And if you pick a market that is growing, it means that you'll have more and more opportunities, right? So those are the characteristics of a high value market segment. So yeah, type in the chat and let me know what you think. And if you have any questions, I see Wendy has a comment. Not issues with nice to have solutions. Yes, a problem should be a must-have problem, you see, as far as possible. Now in consulting is discretionary, right? It's seen as a nice to have a solution. Like, bringing a consultant into the organization is often seen as nice to have, in several cases, because consulting typically focuses on the long term or a strategic issue or something large, a major transformation or something like that. And it's not seen as, okay, let's fix this machine breakdown or something else, right? So a lot of the times it's seen as a nice to have, but then the way you position consulting, the way you kind of position yourself, and the way you kind of speak to the market, you must ensure that you position it as a nice to have. I mean, that's again a broader topic. I will touch on it a little bit as we get into the fourth and fifth factors. But let's move on. Number three, third idea in maximizing profitability is to specialize. To specialize in solving costly and urgent problems. We've talked about picking a market that has a costly and urgent problem. Now, to increase your fees and to maximize your profitability, you want to ensure that you specialize, right? And here's what I mean by specialization, right? On the screen, you see images of two medical professionals. On the left, you see a general practitioner. On the right, you see a neurosurgeon. And of course, I'm spelling these out because I know people are listening on the podcast as well. But you see a general practitioner on the left, and on the right, you see a neurosurgeon. Now, take a guess who makes more money, who charges more fees, right? All things being equal, the neurosurgeon demands or commands, I would say commands rather than demands, commands a higher fee because they solve a much bigger problem, a costly and an urgent problem, right? Anybody needing a neurosurgeon's help possibly is dealing with some kind of fatal issue, right? So that makes neurosurgeons charge more. And plus, not everybody can be a neurosurgeon, right? So there's scarcity in the market. There's an issue with supply as well, right? So that ensures that the value of that skill increases. Now, what if you take that one step further and look at pediatric neurosurgery, right? That is devastating if somebody is going through that, and potentially that is a far more valuable service, right? Neuro-oncology too, right? The more specialized you are, as long as there is a reasonable market for it, the more specialized you are, typically, the more money you make, right? Now, I know that some of you may be thinking, okay, this works in the medical world, but it doesn't necessarily apply to business consulting. But I would challenge you on that. I would say that business problems for a business owner and for top management are very serious problems because they touch on a lot of people's lives. There are employees, there are depending on the company, there are shareholders. There's also personal reputation at stake for management and so on. So business issues can be serious, very serious issues. Of course, not as serious as medical issues, but business issues can be very serious issues. And there are management personnel, executives who take these issues very seriously. And if they find that they have a very costly and urgent problem, and they find you who specializes in solving those problems and who has a track record of solving those problems, getting phenomenal results, right? At that time, as long as you've targeted the right organization that is able and willing to pay the fee, at that time, pricing is not the most important issue on the table, right? You won't be talking about pricing. You'll be talking about the problem. Are you diving deep? Because they'll be interested in understanding how you can solve the problem, and they'll be desperate for help, if you will. I've worked with certain clients like this. So, in my management consulting days. So I know this is true. And I was highly specialized. What I did as a management consultant, for those of you who don't know, was for many years, I served the academia market. I served universities. I worked with the research commercialization departments where universities launched startups from within the university ecosystem, and they licensed new technology that came out of the university's research. It was a highly specialized initiative that I was involved in. And as I did more and more engagements, I got, more and more specialized and more skilled in those types of engagements, right? So it's obviously not the most specialized and most, the costliest business problem out there, but it was a fairly costly problem for the university. And that's where I built my business. So let's just quickly move on. Now, I know that some of you would like to have the replay for the session. The public replays aren't available, but I have a newly launched community called the Consulting Growth Hub. It's free to join for now. I will share the chat. I will share the link to join at the end of the session. Or you can simply go to skool.com, that's skool.com, and find a community called Consulting Growth Hub, and make an application to join, and I'll let you in. And all the replays of all these sessions, we've done about 40, this is the 45th session of Consulting Growth Hour. All the replays are there, and if you're interested, you can go in there and check it out. Okay, so I'll share the link in the chat a little later on. Okay, back to the session. So we get to the fourth idea. Now, this is by far the most important idea that I'd like you folks to take away from this session, right? Because this is a huge topic. And again, like, I'm not an expert. I mean, there are many things I don't know about pricing, right? I've run a business and I've worked with pricing. I've worked with the theory. I've worked with issues that happen on the ground. But here's my understanding of this concept about knowing your value, right? Like, we all know here, like, all I can see from the people in the audience, that we're all, serious consultants, some of us in our early stages, but we know that pricing is about value, the value that you bring to the table, and the value that you bring for your buyer. This concept is about knowing your value, right? So let's deep dive into this, and hopefully I'll answer some questions. I'd love to look at the chat and see some questions, because that kind of will make the discussion a lot more engaging, and I can like talk about practical issues that you folks are facing. So as you listen, please type in the chat. Let me know if you have a question or two. Okay. Now, I want to go back to one of the premises that I talked about earlier on about customer retention, right? Consulting profitability is built over time. And we saw the premise, we saw the research that I presented to you, that increasing customer retention by 5% increases profitability anywhere between 25 to 95%. That's a huge delta, right? 5% increase in customer retention increases profitability by 95%. So, and I've seen this to be true. I mean, I haven't run the numbers, but I've seen this to be true, right? Like, because in the initial years, or in the initial period of the client relationship, there is a learning curve, right? You'll find yourself spending more and more time understanding the client's business, understanding the issues, and so on and so forth. But as you move past that learning curve, you become more valuable to the client, because now you know a lot about them, you know a lot about the issues that they're facing, and you build a rapport. And so, they want you more, assuming that you're adding value to the company and you're kind of delivering results. So they want you more, and typically they keep you on. But once you're outside of that learning curve, you don't spend that much time on the engagement. You can open up your bandwidth to other clients, possibly, right? And keep kind of maintaining that earlier the relationship as well. So profitability grows over time, right? As long as you have a transformational offering that that you offer, and that you can support the client over a long period of time, right? We've talked about creating transformational offerings in other sessions, so go check out those replays. But just want to ensure that you keep this in mind, that consulting profitability is built over time. So when it's built over time, like, how do you choose a pricing technique? Now, we look at pricing theory in the market. There's various types of pricing strategies that companies use, and I'm not going to go through all of them, because you can simply Google this stuff. There's hourly pricing, which is very common in the consulting world. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Some consultants price in a fixed project basis. Competitive pricing is where you know what the others are charging, and you charge somewhere around the ballpark. There's something called skimming pricing, where you start with a high price and you kind of lower the price as you move forward. And there's penetration pricing, where you start with a low price and you kind of increase the price as you move forward. So, and then finally, there's value-based pricing. Pricing based on the perceived value of your solution, right? So in consulting, you'll see a lot of discussions, or you hear a lot of discussions around hourly fees, fixed fees, and value-based pricing, right? There are a lot of people who are against hourly fees, and for the most part, I'm against hourly fees. I don't think consulting or any service should be charged by the hour, right? Because then the incentive is for the consultant to simply prolong the engagement because they get paid more, right? So the incentive for the value for the client is skewed in that respect. But there are some cases where, you would need to charge hourly, right? Then there's fixed fee. You have a fixed fee for an engagement, the clients like it, and so on. And finally, a lot of consultants or experts will talk about value-based pricing, which I feel is ideally you want to be charging based on the value, the perceived value that you bring in, right, to the client organization. I believe that I'm going back to one of the premises again. Pricing is emotional and pricing is subjective. I believe that initially, when you start off on an engagement, right, any of these pricing strategies, especially even if it's hourly pricing, I'm not against hourly pricing in certain situations where, clients or buyers are used to charging by the hour. A lot of buyers, consulting buyers, will look at a consultant and say, okay, if I had, I'm going to use Andrew's example again. He's a go-to-market consultant. So a client may look at Andrew and say that, if I hire a VP of marketing or a CMO, it's going to cost me X number of dollars, $150,000 or $200,000 a year, or whatever the fee is. I don't know what the market rate is. And that's what Andrew brings to the table. Those are the skills he brings to the table. Okay, he's a bit specialized here and there, or he knows, he's got a few more things to bring into to the table. But then they will take that fee and they'll kind of, calculate what the hourly fee is for a person like Andrew, and they would kind of equate that. So a lot of consulting buyers are not very educated about the true value that a consultant or an expert could bring in. And part of the reason for that, a major reason for that, I believe, is that, consultants don't educate them on it, right? It's on us as experts and consultants to educate our market as to the value that we bring to the table. Like, I'll repeat that again. The onus is on us, consultants, to educate the market and our potential buyers on the perceived value of our services and what we bring to the table. Unless you do that, buyers are simply not going to know, right? So in those cases, right, if you need an engagement, if you need cash in the door and you're talking to a buyer, it seems like a good buyer, and they pay, a decent hourly rate, whatever you feel is a decent hourly rate. I'm not against hourly pricing. I'm all about cash flow and ensuring that, your business survives in the early days so that it can thrive as it moves forward. So in those cases, I'm not against hourly pricing. In another case as well, I mean, in some other cases, like for example, if you're an IT consultant, right? I've worked with several IT consultants. In the IT consulting world as well, hourly pricing is kind of the norm, right? Like a lot of consulting buyers want to see, want to see the hourly fee or the hourly rate of a consultant for a couple of reasons. The first reason is what I just mentioned. They're going to kind of compare you with what someone like you would cost them on a full-time basis, an FTE basis. The other reason is that in IT, let's say you're building a software product or you're creating some kind of new application, the scope keeps changing, right? You build a small piece of the engagement and then you test it out. Then they find that, okay, they need to change the scope. So that keeps changing. Scope is not linear. So because of those reasons, IT buyers like to buy by the hour. They're not gonna, there's a fixed fee engagement may not make the most sense. I'm saying may not because in some cases, they may make sense, but in all probability, a fixed fee engagement does not make sense. Even a value-based engagement does not make sense because at that point, you don't know what the full value of the engagement is going to be, right? So it becomes a bit nebulous, right? So in those situations, if you find that you're talking to a good client and they want to kind of go with you, and you're competing with like 3 or 4 other IT consultants, I would say just land the client, right? Like get your cash flow going, and then you can kind of build up your knowledge about value-based pricing, and then kind of use that in future engagements. So my point is that if you find yourself in a situation where you've got to bill hourly, or you've got to bill a fixed fee engagement if the client wants it, and if you feel that there's a good chance that this could be a good client, then I would say go for it, right? But ideally, you want to understand how to price based on value, because that is the most ethical way to price, right? Because people buy based on value, right? And if once you start having a conversation about value and educating your buyer about value, you can maximize your profitability. Because in a lot of cases, the value that you bring in as an expert, if you're again talking to a ideal client in a high value market segment as a specialist that solves costly and urgent problems, typically the value that you create is huge, right? And you should be paid based commensurate to that perceived value. I hope this is making sense. I don't want to be rambling here. So please just type in the chat, give me some feedback. Is this making sense? I don't want it to be too complicated. Ask me a question or two so that I'm clear that you folks are on the same page. So let me know in the chat if you feel that this is, if we're on the right track and if this is all making sense. I see some thumbs ups. I don't know if I can see the chat. I'm just gonna quickly pause here. So I'm gonna take a sip of water. Just let me know in the chat, and we will continue. All right, so thank you. I see some thumbs ups and so on. Okay, thank you. Cool. Let's move on. So if value-based pricing is the most ethical and the right way to ideally price your consulting services, then maximum profitability is achieved when you price based on the perceived value that you bring to your clients and retain clients for a long period of time. If you have a situation, or if you can build your practice to a stage where you price based on value and you have a business model there where you retain clients for long periods of time, that's when you hit maximum profitability. That's how you build a profitable consulting business. That's the ideal situation. I know that a lot of the times, in all practicality, there are sometimes you may not be able to do it. But as you're building your practice, you want to focus on this, and as much as possible, ensure that you sell based on value and you retain clients for long periods of time, right? Okay, so on the screen, you see a picture of a lady. So she's an Irish novelist, and she's the author of, or she's the one who said this very popular phrase, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder." Her name is Margaret Wolfe Hungerford. As I said, she's an Irish novelist. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'm sure all of you have heard of this saying and can agree with it, right? In the same vein, I'm going to say that value is in the eyes of the buyer. It's the same concept, right? The value of any service or solution is always determined by the buyer, or even a product. You go buy something. I mean, if you don't intuitively feel value in it, or if you don't kind of get it and understand it, you're not going to buy it, right? Even if it's cheap, like you have on the App Store or in the Google Play Store, you have apps that are 99 cents and $1.50, but we don't go in and buy every app that we see or upgrade to all of those in-app purchases just because it's cheap. right? We don't buy because we don't see value in certain things, right? Even if it's cheap, it doesn't mean that, people are going to buy it. You have to kind of, to make a purchase, a buyer has to see value in it. So in a consulting situation, your buyer on the left hand side, like you see a graph here, on the left hand side you see big thorny problem. Your buyer is here, they have a big thorny problem, and they want to get to the top right corner of the screen, which is their dream outcome, right? That's where they want to get to, but they're in some kind of pain. They're experiencing some kind of costly problem, right? So then, if value is the way to is value based if value-based pricing is the way to price your consulting services, how do you determine the outcome? How do you determine the value of their desired outcome, especially if you haven't delivered that outcome, right? You're delivering a fee based on value, yes, but then you haven't delivered that value yet. So how do you kind of determine the value or the perceived value of their dream outcome? You see, this is the $1,000,000 question, because if you can do this, if you and the potential buyer or the potential client can sit across the table and agree that, yes, if we roll out this solution, or this consulting engagement, and I'm reasonably, and the client is reasonably certain or confident that you can deliver results for them, right? And you can kind of sit across the table and agree together that here's the value of this engagement, or the perceived value, then they're all the more likely to pay you a higher fee based on the value of the engagement, right? But the $1,000,000 question is, how do you determine the value of their dream outcome, right? So the way you do that is by asking the right questions. This is where the concept of a discovery conversation comes into play. The discovery conversation is nothing but a conversation with a buyer, where you deep dive into their needs and understand where they are now, where they want to go, and uncover what's really going on in the business, and what's it really costing them not to be where they really want to be. So again, you determine the value of the dream outcome through asking the right questions. And I'm going to show you on the screen a few of those questions, not an exhaustive list, but here you go. So here are some of the key questions you need to ask during a discovery conversation to determine your buyer's value. Number one, how long have you been facing this problem? When you know how long the buyer is facing this problem, you understand the extent of their pain. If this issue has been going on for a couple of years, it could be a very costly problem, right? That's a basic question. You want to know how long they've been facing the problem. How do you measure success? What is the criteria for success? Do they measure success in terms of increased revenue, increased profitability, increased efficiency, a lower turnover rate, decreased absenteeism, right? Lower costs, and several other metrics. The thing about business consulting and management consulting is that you can ensure that any kind of consulting that you do, there are ways to quantify the value. Let's say you're a leadership consultant. I know Wendy is in the audience, and she's a leadership and DEI and culture consultant. So even if you're a leadership consultant, sometimes you may feel that leadership is a very nebulous kind of thing. Like, how do you measure the success of a leadership consulting? But you can go online and get research reports from large organizations like Gartner and so on anything related to business functions. I bet you can go online and get a report on the value of the quantified value of great leadership in an organization. There would be some research that's done, and then there are some numbers that you can use as benchmarks, and kind of have a conversation, have an educated conversation about how they measure success, and how they quantify success, and what that ultimately leads to from a numbers perspective. Even if you're a branding consultant, like there are ways to kind of quantify the value of a great brand. So just don't take my word for it. Do your own research and find if you feel that your type of consulting is very nebulous and can never be quantified, go ahead and just simply do the research, and I bet you'll find some information. Number 3, what are your current and desired key performance indicators, right? To understand the actual outcomes of the value of the outcome, you want to understand how they measure currently. Like, do they, if their measure of a success is, let's say, lowering costs, right? So in the last 1 year or in the last quarter, what percentage of costs have they decreased? Have they cut, right? If it's just like 1.5%, and if they want to be at 6%, then there's a huge delta there, right? So you want to get into the nitty gritty and understand what the current performance is based on their measure of success, and their desired performance is. So that way you'll be able to understand, ballpark, what kind of value you could create if you help them reach that desired outcome as it pertains to your consulting work. Number 4, what have you tried before and why isn't it working? You really want to understand this, because if they've been trying other things, what have they tried? How much have they invested in all of that? What's the sunk cost there? And why hasn't it worked? Right? So you'll get an idea of what they've done so far, and how much they've invested in it. What are other potential ways you could solve the problem? Alternatives. So understand from them what else is on their mind. Like, using me is an option. Yes. What are the other ways are you thinking of solving the problem? And like, what is the what's the investment required over there? Like, you want to understand the cost of alternatives, right? Some of you may be thinking that these are really uncomfortable questions to ask a potential buyer, but I would challenge you on that. It may seem uncomfortable to really deep dive, but if you're talking to a qualified buyer, right, and if there's trust in that relationship, right, if you have a reputation, and if you come from a place where they trust you, and they trust you to bring their best and make this session valuable for them, they expect you to ask the right questions and ask the tough questions, right? So these are questions that you ask them because you want to really determine what the buyer wants and what's at stake for the buyer. And sometimes buyers don't even do this analysis. They don't know this stuff. So having a conversation like this is valuable to the buyer itself, just this conversation, because then you open their eyes into what's really going on in the organization and what the true costs are. What is it costing them to stay where they are? Buyers don't know that. But when you have these conversations and you really open up the situation, they will see value in simply having this conversation. And the other thing that will happen is they will see you as an expert. This consultant knows what they're talking about, right? Because not many people go in and ask these questions and get really deep. All right. I've got just 1 minute, folks. So I'm going to try and rush through this because I understand that some of you may need to jump. So very quickly, you want to base your fee at 10% of the perceived value. Let's say the perceived value is, $1 million. Roughly, your fee should be $100,000, right? Okay, that's in theory. A lot of the times you'll find that when you do this engagement, you do this exercise, sometimes the perceived value will be in the tens of millions and hundreds of millions. So in that case, Are you going to do a $10 million engagement? No, practically clients are not going to pay you $10 million, in an independent consultant or even a small boutique firm. Not in most cases, right? In those cases, you want to base your fee on the cost of alternatives because you already asked that question, right? What else are you, what are your options and what's the investment on those options? A lot of the times, you can base your value based on the cost of alternatives, and you'll find that itself is will give you a higher fee than an hourly fee or even a fixed fee that is not based on any metric. So I hope this is clear. I know that these concepts may be a little new. If you'd like to understand more of these concepts, just send me a note or send me an email and join the group Consulting Growth Hub. Here's where I'm going to be talking a lot more about all of these concepts, and it's just it's where you can meet other consultants and just become better at consulting. Very quickly, number 5, the 5th idea to build your consulting business into a profitable one or maximize profitability through pricing is to build a reputation. Anyone know who this gentleman is? So I'm just gonna, tell you who it is. You may not know the face, but when I give you this book on the screen, The Innovator's Dilemma, a lot of you may recognize the book, and this gentleman's name is Clayton Christensen. He's obviously a very famous author, management author. I believe he's no more. So yeah, he was a famous management author. His books are super famous. And people like Clayton Christensen are sought after consultants, right? Companies want people like him to come into the organizations and fix them, right? So when you build a reputation like this, companies want to work with you. I'm not saying that everybody has to write a book and make it a bestseller, right? You can build a reputation by getting a referral in from a trusted source, writing detailed articles, speaking at third-party events, hosting events for your own community, having detailed testimonials, case studies of solving hard problems. All of these things will help you build a reputation. And when you build a reputation, more people know about you and they want to work with you. And when they want to work with you, when you have a stellar reputation of solving hard problems, you will attract ideal clients who want to work with you. And when they want to work with you, price is not the most important issue on the table. And that's where you can maximize profitability, because then you name your price based on, of course, a value discussion, right? So there you have it, folks. I've gone a couple of minutes over, but I love this topic. This stuff really gets my juices flowing. I know that a lot of these topics are, and these sessions are like drinking out of a fire hose. There's a lot of new concepts and so on. But I hope this was helpful. You can. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes. For those of you who want to jump, feel free to do so. But I'm going to stick around. If there are any questions that you want me to answer, just type in the chat. I'm going to look in the chat and see if there's any questions. But in the meantime, if you need help and you want to put these principles into action and add $100,000 to $500,000 in new consulting revenue within 12 months, if you need extra help, feel free to reach out to me. Go to consultingleap.com, schedule a call with me, or email me at fm, that's as the radio, fm, at fahimmusa.com, and let's explore your needs together. And I'm also going to stick around and type in the chat. I don't have this offhand. Type in the chat, the link to the community Consulting Growth Hub. So if any of you want to join that community and access the replays, for those of you listening on the podcast, go to the show notes and you have all the details there. But I think there was one question that came in, and I'm going to answer it. So Wendy says, is customer retention possible if we're solving the problem, or is this about different engagement phases? Can you say what leads to retention if one is resolving the issue engaged to fix? Yeah, it's a good question. Customer retention, if you solve the problem, then a lot of the times in consulting, they'll want to have you around. Because if you're, let's say you've fixed a strategic problem, and they're implementing the solution, they'll want to have you around to kind of help oversee the implementation or just be there in order to, you know, in order to kind of be consulted with, and be there for support, right? The extent of the engagement may not be as heavy as what it was when you're building the strategy for them, or creating that solution for them, but then they still retain you because they want you around because you've built something that they're currently using, right? That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at consulting client retention is that sometimes you may have strategic clients where you have this large organization that has sister concerns that refers you to different organizations within their group. So you have a relationship with that big organization, and that's the client. That's where you're retained. You have a good relationship with them, and they keep passing you on to their sister concerns so that you can do engagements as and when required. And those engagements can be smaller. They need not be bigger. So that's another way of retaining clients, that you can solve problems for and then simply move on. So it's a good question, Wendy. All right. So Nick says, what is the risk of bringing the ideas to the customer and then they go out on their own? You're not bringing the solution to the customer. You're only asking the questions. You see, you're not in the discovery situation, the discovery conversation, rather. You're not talking about the solution at all. You're asking the question to uncover the true problem. This is a good topic because as consultants, often in discovery and needs assessments that we do, we get into problem solving mode because we're natural problem solvers. Consultants and advisors are natural problem solvers, and you kind of get into the habit of solving the problem during the discovery phase, or the discovery conversation. But you should kind of check yourself there and ensure that you are using that time to uncover what's really going on in that organization and not solve the problem. You see, you're collecting data and you're collecting what's important to the client in order to ensure that you can come up with the right solution for them. So that's not a place for problem solving. It's a place for assessing their needs and gathering data. I hope that answers your question. All right, folks. So thank you so much for sticking around. I appreciate it. And go ahead and join the community for those of you who are interested, and I'll see you there. And if we're not connected on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search for my name, Fahim Musa, and let's connect. And I'll see you at the next